Haredi in the Kaaba. Religious objects and rituals in and around the Kaaba are regularly adduced as evidence for Buddhist or, more generally, Indian influences on early Islam. In and of itself, the case for connections between India and Arabia is not hard to make. The immensely interconnected nature of Eurasian culture since antiquity is now widely documented. Trade features prominently in accounts of exchanges and other contacts between communities separated by language, religion, ethnicity and socio-economic or political formation. While the Silk Roads serve as a bracket for such contacts across the large territories from the Mediterranean to East Asia, two other phenomena are critical for the theory of a Buddhist presence in Western Arabia on the eve of Islam: the Indian Ocean trade and Meccan trade. Trade around the Indian Ocean and between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean predates the rise of Islam by centuries, as one can easily glean from scholarship concerning the relationship between ancient Rome and India. This trade gave rise to relatively cosmopolitan milieus in southern Arabia and the Persian Gulf and accounts for the presence of Indians in these areas. To what extent these conditions also obtained in Western Arabia is a separate issue. The Arabian Peninsula was, after all, not a uniform cultural and political landscape. Trade between the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean almost naturally involved the Red Sea. The extent to which this connection was active at specific points in time, as well as the relationship between Mecca and any Red Sea ports, complicate assumptions about any significant and continuous Indian presence in Western Arabia. Ritual circumambulation, common to both Muslim and Buddhist religious practice, is sometimes seen as the most significant and obvious legacy of Indians in Western Arabia. The similarities between Muslim and Buddhist circumambulation were not lost on medieval Muslim authors who sought to account for them with stories of contacts. In the above-cited Book of Idols, Ibn al-Kalbi explains not only the origins of idol worship, but also the practice of circumambulation as rooted in India. In his History of the Barmakids, written at the very beginning of the 9th century, Abu Hafs Umar al-Kirmani compared the Buddhist rituals surrounding the stupa of Nabahar with the Muslim pilgrimage to Mecca and claimed that the former was inspired by the latter. Van Bladel 2011. 60, 74. Bosworth 1994. Maliki and Shirvani 1984. Accounts of such connections are not prominent in medieval narratives. According to the Islamic tradition, Muhammad simply continued, and thus validated, a pre-existing practice which had emerged from local circumstances. The cult around the Kaaba is commonly attributed to Abraham. Among some modern authors, however, these parallels in ritual are indeed taken as reflecting earlier contacts between Buddhists and Meccans. Marcus Gross presents one of the most detailed comparisons, which in their cumulative effect he sees as so distinctive as to betray Buddhist influences in Western Arabia. The argument is unpersuasive. While Muslim and Buddhist ritual circumambulation constitute indeed some of the best-known examples of the practice, Diana Eck has surveyed examples of Hindu, Jewish as well as Native American ritual circumambulation and observes that circumambulation is a fundamental rite of orientation, and is often thought of as a human repetition of the apparent movement of the sun. In fact, the practice of tawaf is also attested for pre-Islamic South Arabia. This explanation can be reconciled with theories of earlier Buddhist influences, but the reconciliation is inefficient and extraneous. Apart from this ritual associated with the Kaaba, the physical shape of the sanctuary has attracted the attention of authors who argued for the presence of Buddhist or Indian cults in Western Arabia at the time Islam emerged. They have found an especially promising lead in the paintings which reportedly existed inside the Kaaba. The Islamic tradition has it that in 630 or so Muhammad smashed 360 idols kept in the sanctuary and removed its paintings. The paintings may have dated only to about 608, when the Kaaba had burned down due to an accident. Al-Azraqi, the 9th century author of A History of Mecca, offers a detailed account of the reconstruction, in which a carpenter named Bakm plays a critical role. Bakm, perhaps an Ethiopian man who was in one way or another affiliated with the Byzantine Empire, had been shipwrecked in the Red Sea and ended up in Mecca. Bakm al-Rumi said to the Quraysh, "Do you want the roof pitched or flat? Rather build a house of our Lord flat," he said. So they built it flat and they put in it 6 columns in 2 rows. In each row were 3 columns from the northeast corner where is the stone, to the southwest corner, and they made its external height from the ground to its summit 18 cubits high, and previously had been 9 dirham high. The Quraysh added another 9 dirham to the upper part, and they built it from the top to the bottom with courses of stone and courses of wood. And 15 courses were of wood, and 16 courses were of stone, and they fixed its water spout that pours forth in stone. And they placed wooden steps inside it at the northeast corner to ascend by them to its rear, and they decorated its ceiling and its internal wall surfaces and its columns. And they put on its columns pictures of the prophets, pictures of trees, and pictures of the angels. There was a picture of the prophet Ibrahim Khalil al-Rahman with divining arrows, and a picture of Isa ibn Maryam and his mother, and a picture of the angels. Upon them be peace, all of them. And when it was the day of the conquest of Mecca, the prophet entered. And he sent off al-Fadl ibn al-Abbas ibn Abd al-Muttalib to come with water from Zamzam. Then he called for a cloth, and he ordered to rub off these pictures, and they were obliterated. One reportedly restored the Kaaba to what the Islamic tradition claims had been its pristine monotheistic form, although he reportedly spared a painting of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus. In 683, the Kaaba was again destroyed, this time in the civil war between Ibn al-Zubayr and the Umayyads. Vaziri adduces 2 elements in the history of the Kaaba during the 7th century for his argument for Buddhist influence, the shape and the idols. The new, flat roof of the building he takes to be a post-Islamic innovation, which disguised the original dome that was modeled after Buddhist shrines. But he appears to conflate the 2 destructions of the Kaaba. Al-Azraqi describes the change from dome to flat roof as a development in Mecca before Muhammad's prophecy. This sequence, however, appears to be fairly easily reconcilable with Vaziri's larger argument about a Buddhist legacy which was gradually forgotten or edited out of the Islamic tradition. Either way, if we assume that after the first 7th century destruction of the Kaaba, the local leaders received support from an expert with a Byzantine background, the dome is not hard to explain as Bakm's potential default choice for a roof. Domes also marked the shape of Byzantine religious architecture, after all, and the Meccans may just as well have wanted to differentiate themselves from Byzantine Christians with their preference for the flat roof. Independent of the shape of the Kaaba's roof, the objects and decoration within the Meccan sanctuary may provide more hopeful starting points. It is indeed curious that before Muhammad's prophecy the local Meccans would have illustrated the Kaaba with Jewish and Christian figures, that is, if we accept Al-Azraqi's account. Vaziri observes, it seems far-fetched that the pre-Islamic paintings of the Kaaba, a shrine whose patrons before the Prophet of Islam were neither Christian nor Jewish, would have contained paintings of biblical characters. The nature of these paintings may have been the remainder of pre-Islamic Hindu-Buddhist artwork, if any. Vaziri was not the first author to suggest this. A crucial figure here is Hariti, a Buddhist goddess or demon who used to eat children, but upon her conversion to Buddhism became a protector of children. Ernest Binfield Havell, British administrator in India and art historian, argued in his Handbook of Indian Art that the painting of the Virgin Mary in the Kaaba may in fact have shown Haredi and her partner, and that the two female characters were confused. Havell 1920. 106. According to Havell, who considered Islamic architecture unoriginal, the history of the mosque began with Buddhist temples. The Kaaba marked the starting point of this development. The most venerated shrine in Arabia, which was the first model of a muhamidan mosque, strongly suggests a Buddhist temple or monastery filled with Mahayanist images. Havell argued that when the Buddhist images were removed from the temple, empty niches remained behind, and these were repurposed as mihrab, indicating the direction of prayer. Extrapolating from later cases of Islamization of the built environment, he explained that in private homes such empty niches were used as cupboards or receptacles for the hookah, rose water vessel, lamp, or other articles of domestic use. The history of Haredi worship may lend strength to the suggestion that a Haredi statue ended up in Western Arabia. The goddess was popular in Gandharan art and was especially associated with the protection of children from smallpox. Idh Bavar suggested a more specific reason for the flourishing of Haredi representations in Gandharan art during the empire of the Khazanas in particular. He related the spread of the cult to the outbreak of the Antonini plague in the Roman Empire in 165 CE, citing evidence from throughout the Asian continent, including southern Arabia and China. Assuming that the disease in question was smallpox and originated in South Asia, he proposed that the epidemic was already growing in the reign of Kanishka. Within a few years the infection would have been reaching pandemic proportions, and the numerous Haredi images of Gandhara would thus reflect the growing desperation of the Buddhist devotees. The Khazanas are widely recognized as instrumental for the westward expansion of Buddhism. If Haredi was especially popular during the Kusana Empire, it seems a little more plausible that a stray Haredi statue or other representation may have ended up in Western Arabia. Whether it served as a model for a Kaaba painting is something else. The theory of Haredi in the Kaaba requires a closer examination of the iconographic tradition in order to substantiate the possibility of a misidentification. Al-Azraqi cites his grandfather for more details. His grandfather transmits a report from Ibn Yir'ah, who overheard an exchange between Sulayman ibn Musa al-Shami and Anata ibn Abi Rabah. The former inquired, "Have you seen in the Kaaba an image of Maryam Mary and Isa Jesus?" Whereupon Atta affirmed, "Yes. I have seen in the Kaaba an image of the adorned Maryam with her adorned son Isa sitting in her lap." King identifies numerous parallels, Christian representations of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus that match this description. The representations of Haredi surveyed by Ahuja show the Buddhist goddess surrounded by about half a dozen children, mostly around her legs, which scarcely resembles the reported Kaaba painting. Here we might note that a Haredi closer to the iconography of the Virgin Mary with baby Jesus can be found on a Gandharan rondel in the collection of the Metropolitan Museum. A single child sits prominently on the lap of the lavishly adorned woman. It is one of the earliest Haritas and dates to the 1st century CE. The great historian of Gandharan Buddhist art, Alfred Fouquer, demonstrated just how easily Haredi can be associated, even confused with the Virgin Mary, when wrote about the Buddhist Madonna, a label picked up by Havell. A second story has attracted the interest of modern proponents of Buddhist influences, the treasure of the Kaaba. According to a tradition widely quoted in medieval Arabic literature, the Jurhum, the old custodians of the sanctuary, were defeated by another tribe, the Khazar, and before the Jurhum left Mecca, they buried the treasure of the Kaaba in the Zamzam well. Ibn Hisham, editor of Ibn Ishaq's D. 151,768. Life of the Prophet, an important text in the Islamic tradition, provides details regarding the treasure, which was later discovered by Muhammad's uncle Abd al-Muttalib. He found in it 2 gazelles of gold. These were the 2 gazelles which the Jurhum had buried in the well when they left Mecca. He also found in it Kali swords and armor. Of interest here are the 2 golden gazelles. While R.B. Sargent and Brannon Wheeler put them in the contexts of the Arabian ritual hunt and animal sacrifices, Sargent 1976, 88. Wheeler 2006, 26 and 152. The gazelles also bring to mind the Buddha's sermon at the deer park in Sarnath. As Mustafa Vaziri points out, 2 deer regularly appear in Buddhist art, where they frequently flank the wheel of Dharma. One can see them, for example, in Gandharan schist panels. Where does this take us? Not very far. Ruminating Artiodactyla, such as various kinds of gazelles or deer, can be found all over the world and are widely represented in figurative art. Even the religious context for these animals is too general to serve as evidence for cultural influences. Another feature of these objects, which had allegedly been kept in the Kaaba, might be helpful: their material. Gold is not a common material of ancient Arabian objects, but any surviving separate golden or gilded representations of deer in Buddhist art date to the period after the rise of Islam. Gandharan art, however, may offer an avenue for an unsolved problem surrounding the Kaaba paintings, which, as we saw earlier, are reported to have included an illustration of Ibrahim and, according to a variant, Ishmael with divining arrows. Divining arrows are one of the few pre-Islamic Arabian rituals that are described in some detail in sources of the Islamic tradition and which are clearly rejected as a practice that should not continue. As King points out, no Christian iconographic parallels have been identified that would explain why Ibrahim or Ismail would carry such arrows. Given the use of divining arrows in the pre-Islamic tradition, one might imagine a fusion of Christian iconography and Arabian practice. If we assumed, however, that Gandharan images were washed up in Mecca in one way or another and displayed in the Kaaba, the image of Vajrapani might offer a solution. The companion of the Buddha is often shown with a fly whisk and a thunderbolt known as Vajra. The highly stylized thunderbolt may have been mistaken for a set of arrows, grasped tightly in the middle in the fist, the arrows diverging from each other at the respective ends. More convincingly, King puts the brief literary descriptions of the paintings in the context of late antique Christian iconography. Given the consequences of Byzantine iconoclasm, the evidence that can serve comparative purposes is scant, especially in the case of Ibrahim and his divining arrows. However, King too concludes that Meccan trade must have been critical for the introduction of Christian iconography to the Kaaba, especially Palestine, Syria, Egypt, Yemen, and Ethiopia. King 2004, 225. Illuminated manuscripts also may have served as a source. On the other hand, trade too could account for the presence of Indian objects in Western Arabia. Furthermore, while the guardians of the Kaaba in pre-Islamic times may not have been Christian, we have no indication that they were Buddhists, either, or followed any other Indian religious tradition. The same inclusiveness which would have allowed them to display an image of Hariti in the Kaaba would have allowed them to include an image of the Virgin Mary. As tempting as it is to include pre-Islamic Mecca in ever new ways into the entangled religious landscapes of Eurasia, the theory of the Kaaba as a Buddhist sanctuary relies on strained conjecture and forced and circumstantial evidence. There is no positive evidence which would point to a misidentification of Hariti with the Virgin Mary. and the parallels between Buddhist and Muslim ritual are more easily explained as widespread us in a difficult position where we have to rely on textual evidence only. On some level, this reconstruction of early Islamic history which stipulates Buddhist influences clearly presents a challenge to the Islamic tradition, which does not acknowledge such a presence of Indian or Buddhist religious objects in Mecca except as a legacy of remote history. To what extent the Islamic tradition is meant to be agent or reflection in the eradication of Buddhist testimonies remains unclear in the literature surveyed here. The most significant challenge may lie in the challenge to the relationship between Islam and other religions as established by historical events. The story about Muhammad and the painting of Mary and Jesus reflects and prefigures the general relationship between Islam and Christianity, as does Muhammad's smashing of the idols, which paradigmatically defines the attitude to idolatry. The idols stand especially for Arabian idolatry and polytheism, a tradition which was meant to be entirely replaced by Islam. While authors like Ibn al-Kalbi may have been happy enough to see a connection in India in the remote past, a more recent connection may have implied that Meccan idolatry and polytheism were in fact not locally particular, but continued to exist in India, eventually even under Muslim rule. Mahmud of Ghazni may not have wanted to accept this, but Muslims must have been aware of ongoing Indian practices of using objects in religious worship, as travel reports indicate, for example. On another level, the theory of Buddhist material culture in Mecca validates the Islamic tradition. It accepts the story of Muhammad smashing idols as a description of early 7th century events. It does not reread these idols as polemical representations of Christian objects along the lines of more radical revisionist reformulations. One may say that it presents a greater challenge to tradition than to tradition, disputing the interpretation more than the text.